Hello everyone, welcome to Java Tutorials. My name is Kishore. In this video, we will discuss how to create user-defined exceptions or custom exceptions. Whenever you create any application, there will be a chance where you want to create your own exceptions and you want to throw that. Like take an example of online transactions you do. In some certain cases, what usually happens is if the balance is insufficient, correct? Assume your account balance is 5,000 and you are trying to transfer the amount which is greater than 5,000. In that case, the code should create an exception called insufficient balance exception. You cannot create an inbuilt exception like arithmetic exception or number format exception because that doesn't give any meaning to the end user, correct? In certain cases, you may need to create custom exceptions. In order to create custom exceptions, what you have to do is you need to extend with any one of the class that is part of exception. If you want to create checked exception, you extend with exception class. In order to create unchecked exception, you create runtime exception. But you know that whenever you have a checked exception, the caller will always get an error in case it is not handled, and at the compilation time only it must be handled. So it's always better to create checked exception so that whoever invokes the method whenever the exception is created, the compiler will always force the developers to handle it. Or you can also propagate the exception through to the using the throws class so that the caller will always handle the checked exception. Let us create one exception with the name called insufficient balance exception, and we will extend with one of the class called exception. Now what happens? Your insufficient balance exception class is going to become checked exception because it is extending exception. If you extend runtime exception, then what happens? This class is going to become unchecked exception. And if you try to create the insufficient balance exception by extending unchecked exception, compiler will not force you to handle the exception. But the advantage of checked exception is you can always propagate it. Like assume that this is maybe like ATM m- machine which is actually processing the payment, and it is calling the method which is present in the bank server. Maybe the backend server has a withdraw method. In that case, ATM should get the message telling that transaction declined because of insufficient balance exception. So if backend server propagates the exception, only then ATM will come to know that the exception is occurred and ATM has to handle that exception. But if the backend server itself handles the exception, ATM will never come to know that there was some exception occurred in the backend. For that reason only we will propagate, correct? But if you want to propagate, obviously it should be checked exception because in our previous example we discussed unchecked exceptions. If you propagate also, caller will never come to know it is actually generating an exception because compiler will not check that. What we will do, we will enter some amount and we will pass that amount to the withdraw method. But there are certain rules you should follow while creating the custom exceptions. What are the rules? At least you should create two constructors. One is default and another is the string taking constructor because most of the constructors in the exception class have these two constructors. Now let us go to the exception class. Look at the exception class. It has a default constructor and it also has a constructor taking string parameter. Let us go to runtime exception. If I go to runtime exception, even runtime exception also has the default constructor and the constructor taking string argument. So the advantage of creating the parameterized constructor is when you create an exception object, you can pass different error messages, the dynamic error messages. And you can use the default constructor to pass probably some default error messages so that the catch block can show what is the error message. So let me create one default constructor that is called as insufficient balance exception, and we will simply call the default constructor of the parent class. And one more is we will create insufficient balance exception with string parameter, and we will pass that error message to the superclass. And remember, there is a detailed message in the throwable that will be initialized. And in the catch block, you can always read that error message. That is going to be the ATM machine, which is going to get that message and print that on the ATM monitor. That is what the imagination we have to do now. So now the ATM machine code, we will think that it is in the main method, and the backend server code will be present in the withdraw method. So let us try to write scanner class object we will create, and we will take the input from the keyboard, and we will say enter amount, and let's say we will use next double method, and we will create the withdraw method. So public static void withdraw method, and it has to take one parameter of amount. And what it has to do is, let's say it has one balance variable with the value called 50,000, and if balance is 50,000 and if amount is greater than the balance, and then you can generate a custom exception called insufficient balance exception. So we will write an if condition with that statement. If amount is greater than balance, we will generate insufficient balance exception like this: throw new insufficient balance exception, but we will pass an error message telling that amount can't be debited because, or we will say amount withdrawn declined because no balance. We can write this message, but you might be thinking why there is a compilation error. Look at the compilation error. It says unhandled exception type insufficient balance exception because it is extending exception. So withdraw method can handle this exception inside the withdraw itself. But if withdraw handles the insufficient balance exception inside the withdraw itself, then backend server will be having those console logs what happened. But ATM programs which are running outside the bank servers will never know what happened. So we will propagate that message through the throws class through the exception object, so that whoever invokes the withdraw, they had to mandatorily handle the checked exceptions. So we will not handle. Instead, we will write the throws class. But before that, what we will do is, in case the if is not executed, we need to enter balance is equals to balance minus amount, correct? Balance minus amount. And if in case we need to propagate the exception to the caller, we can write throws insufficient balance exception. And this time what happens, if the exception is generated, withdraw will not handle it because it is not having an idea how to handle the insufficient balance exception. Let the caller handle the insufficient balance exception. The caller could be the main method thinking that it is an ATM machine code, or it could be some UPI based applications or mobile applications which are invoking the withdraw. And if they are mobile applications, and they will get the exception, and the catch block is going to show that error message on the mobile screen. If it is a web browser, then the code is going to handle the insufficient balance exception and will display the error message on the browser. And if it is an ATM monitor, it can display the error message on the console by handling that insufficient balance exception in the catch block, correct? Let us call the withdraw method now by passing the amount. And when I invoke the withdraw, compiler immediately says, please handle the insufficient balance exception because withdraw propagates insufficient balance exception. unhandled exception type, inception balance exception. So now the withdraw should be invoked only inside the try and the catch block. Let us keep the try and catch with inception balance exception, and inside the try we will write withdraw amount, and inside the catch what we will do, we will simply write sys error e dot get message. We are going to print the error message what is present in this object of insufficient balance exception. And if I invoke the withdraw method by passing the amount, what happens? Let's see. Let us run the program and let me enter the amount 45,000. I get no output. Let me print some message here telling that amount is withdrawn and ATM must dispense the cash. Let me run this program, and now if I enter 49,999, no problem. It has to say is withdrawn, ATM must dispense the cash, something like that. But if I rerun the program, let's say I will write 51,000, then amount 51,000 withdraw declined because no balance. So in case the withdraw had handled the insufficient balance exception, obviously in this program we would see that error message. You might think that we can do this, right? Yes, you can do, because withdraw and main both are run in the same environment, but in real time this method is going to be present in the backend server, and this statement will be present in the client program. Client program printing the error message means it is going to print in the client application, and if you print the error message in the server program, in the server environment, those error messages will be printed that you cannot see at all. So you can always make use of the throws so that you can propagate the exception to the client code so that client will handle those exceptions because it knows how to handle it. So that is how you create the custom exception, and also how you will use the throws class with custom exceptions. So thank you so much. See you in the next video.